Are you a lunatic? Well, you might be, folks, especially if people are accusing you of being a lunatic. It's certainly happened to me pretty much all of my life. And today in this video, I'm going to explain how lunacy and genius are the same. The only difference between a lunatic and a genius is a timeline, because today's lunatic is tomorrow's genius. And I'm going to explain to you how all innovators, all geniuses had to start by being the black sheep, by talking stuff that nobody else got, and then having to wait for the world to catch up. And if you look at some geniuses, they sometimes have to die before their genius is actually realized. Look at some of the painters, the people that sell out, whose art sells for the most, died in poverty because people didn't get their genius at the time. So today we're going to discuss this phenomenon. Genius, lunacy, is it the same thing? So let's start with a little backstory. What qualifies me to talk about this stuff? So my parents were both psychiatric nurses. So when I was 7 months old, I was moved into what is now considered a bona fide lunatic asylum, or it was at the time. And back in the 1970s, when that happened, when I was born, I was moved into a lunatic asylum, and that's what everybody outside of it called it. So that became very familiar. And I was a lunatic on day release, especially at school. So I got a lot of heat, I got a lot of derision, I got a lot of not so pleasant comments, shall we say, about my mental health. But the good news about that, just to flip it, just in case you think I'm going into victim mode, there were genuinely lunatics at my school, some that were which are doing time right now. And the fact that everyone thought I was a lunatic meant that the real lunatics gave me a wide berth. So it actually worked in my favor. So I grew up being labeled a lunatic and in a lunatic asylum. So that's where I started. My parents were both psychiatric nurses. I would argue for both of them that the most impressive thing that either of them did was convincing a lunatic asylum that they were fit to work for them. Because quite often, folks, my experience is the lunatics run the asylum. And that hasn't changed in life as I've moved forward. So let's just bring this to life. In a lunatic asylum, anyone that showed any sort of desire to do harm to others was either sedated, sectioned, or electrocuted. So section involved being locked up in a room, sometimes a padded cell. Sedated, there were plenty of medications that were administered to calm down unruly patients, and electrocuted, something called electroconvulsive therapy, which would now be considered a fairly draconian technique when nothing worked, when none of the medications worked. So as a last ditch resort, they would wire up their brain to an electric current and put volts through their body. Now, I actually witnessed this on my nurse training. They were still doing this in the 90s, folks. And I can tell you it's very barbaric and it's only use. The patient I saw ended up wetting themselves completely off the head. I mean, it really looks like a savage experience, but this was the way that they dealt with lunatics. Now let's translate that, folks. People that showed desire to do harm to others. Well, in this day and age, that would qualify you to be a world leader because most of the world leaders in this day and age, they sanction war. We won't even talk about vested interest, about having shares in the factories that manufacture the weapons. But that's another conversation for another day, and that's more Michael Moore than it is for me. So I'll leave that one alone for now. But the point being, the lunatics run the asylum, folks. So if you want to look at global macro lunacy, then the lunatics are definitely running the asylum. But let's take that away. Let's apply it to life. Let's apply it to life. Certainly growing up, people say, you're a lunatic. I was like, I'm the only sane one. And as life goes on, I start to think all the people accusing me of being lunatics are often the most lunatic people. But anyway, let's look at this from a business perspective. Let's look at it from an evolution perspective. Most lunatics, let's look at some of the best philosophers, for example. Aristotle, all he did was ask questions, or Plato and Socrates. So Socrates taught Plato, who taught Aristotle. Now, Socrates, the original person, who didn't document anything, all that we know about him came from his student, Socrates, and his student, um, Plato. So, well, Plato, I'm mixing them up in my head, but you know the drill. First, there was Aristotle. No, there wasn't. I'm confusing myself here. Socrates was the original, Plato was his student, and Aristotle was his student. So there you go. Bit of lunacy there right in the middle of the video. And I won't even bother editing it out because that just proves beautifully what I'm talking about. Sometimes us lunatics, we can get a little bit caught in our own world. So the bottom line is he was made to commit suicide to drink hemlock because nobody understood him. He was asking too many difficult questions and he was upsetting the powers that be. And when you threaten the powers that be, they tend not to like it. So let's look at some of the artists of the time. Look at Van Gogh, for example, died a pauper. A lot of the famous artists these days did that because nobody understood their genius at the time. They were ahead of the curve. A lot of people that come up with great theories of life are spend their whole life struggling and trying to change things, and no one really gets them, and they think they're a lunatic for trying. Look at William Wilberforce, who spent his whole life fighting against slavery, and it wasn't until he was on his deathbed that they finally passed it. Spent his whole life being a lunatic. And it took him to pretty much be on death's door for anything to come of it. You know, these are the sort of lunatics that want to change the world, that want to do good things, especially when everyone around you is playing the safe game, sticking in their lane. They're not ruffling feathers. They're not questioning the powers that be. They're not making the changes and not taking the chances. They're not taking the risks. They're believing the naysayers. And that is part of the journey, folks. Who we surround ourselves with is huge. And most geniuses end up as lunatics because you're born into a family that does not understand who you are and what you're about. And neither do your peers. So being comfortable in your own skin is the first thing. Being a successful lunatic, genius, and staying on the path, staying in the lane. It's very easy to swerve off when there's nobody in your corner, folks, which is why lunatics, geniuses, you need an incredible relationship with yourself. It's a very long, lonely journey on this path when you don't know who you are, or you don't know who your friends are, or you haven't connected to your peers, your spiritual family who understand what you're doing. And sometimes it might be the next generation. You may have to spend your whole life going against the flow here, folks. And there's not many people that have the stamina or the skin thick enough to do that, which is why being called a lunatic, being accused of being a lunatic, in my world, it's a pretty good thing. It's a compliment in my world. My friends call me a lunatic, and I see that as a term of endearment. They know what I'm all about, folks, and I've always gone against the grain. I fell out with everybody, the powers that be, at my time as a nurse because I was rocking the boat. I was asking questions that nobody wanted to answer. I ended up leaving nursing, and I ended up doing some things in the realm of energy medicine. And some of the stories of the things that I've seen, people just would not believe it. And I know that now. I know I'm long enough in the tooth to know that there's no point even explaining this to the main audience, because unless you've seen it with your own eyes, you're not going to believe some of the stuff that I've done. So there you go, folks. Having self-belief is a big core to this lunatic genius journey. And you may die with everybody thinking you're a lunatic when you're actually the genius. So I'd stay confident, folks. Stay committed to your cause. Believe in yourself. And not only that, but if you are that lunatic and you're watching this video, well, I tend to attract lunatics into my world, the black sheep, the people that nobody gets, the people who are walking in the opposite direction to the crowd. They are the type of people that tend to find themselves into my network, into my radar. And if you're still watching this now, then you are probably one of them. So I would suggest for your good, it will definitely help me, but it will help you as well if you're still watching. If you're not subscribed to this channel, then please do. There's the way forward. And if you want more lunatic content, then you can find another little video there. So my lunatic friends, stay focused, stay committed, and stay safe and secure in the fact that you've got this.